Welcome to the Big Fellas Podcast, where we chop it up about all things past, present, and future about the game of basketball. Where facts, stats, and context reign supreme.
That is blasphemous!
Sometimes it gets crazy, but we always keep it real. Get ready to learn from players, coaches, and fans from all levels of the game and see the court in a brand new way. And now, fresh off the sidelines, here's your host, John Hartofilis.
What it do, fellas, and welcome to the Big Fellas Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, JH, coming to you from New York City, the Mecca of basketball. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Howard Beck, senior NBA writer for Bleacher Report and critically acclaimed sports journalist. Howard started off his career as a beat writer covering the Kobe and Shaq Lakers before coming to New York to work for the New York Times, reporting on our very own New York Knicks. Now, Howard serves as the face of Bleacher Report, and we had a great discussion about his experiences covering some of the league's greatest teams, his unlikely path to the top of the sports journalism world, and why he will not stick to sports. We've got a good one in store for you today, fellas. Episode number 23, Howard Beck, Bleacher Report. Howard, what's going on?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm great, and I'm super excited to do this episode with you. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm really looking forward to it.
Absolutely.
So just to start off, can you just tell our listeners what kind of sparked your interest in basketball?
It's funny because I don't think I have a great standard answer for that or one that makes much sense as it pertains to my career. I didn't play a ton of basketball growing up, to be honest. My best sport was actually cross country and track. I was a runner and, played a fair amount of pickup hoops as a kid, had a basket mounted on our house, in San Jose where I grew up until I was 10. Then we moved. And for some reason, the new house, we couldn't install a basket outside. I don't know if it was the way this.
What? Yeah.
It was like a stucco house. Like this is typical like California stucco house, right? And the old house, I think, had enough wood framing to hang it on. But in the new house, I remember this conversation with my parents. I'd forgotten about this. I had actually asked about, well, could we mount one there? I was like 10 when we moved. And I think it was because the way that house was designed, like there was nothing to hang the hoop from or mount it to, and they didn't want to put it straight into the stucco because I think it would have like cracked the stucco, something like that. I don't know.
Wow. I would have been, oh my God.
There's no good answer here because like basketball wise, I grew up in the Bay Area in the 80s. The Niners are the dominant team, and the Niners were my favorite team, period, of any sport. And so I was a big NFL guy just from a fan perspective. And the Warriors, as you know, sucked for the most of the last, half century, They won a championship when I was like really small. I think that was in 75. And then it was just, desolation for a long time up until the current model. So basketball, it's not like basketball wasn't big in the Bay Area. Just as a fan, you don't get drawn in as much if the team is crappy. So it's not like it was basketball that hooked me. It used to be when you wanted to become a sports writer, you didn't pick the sport. The sport kind of picked you, or the opportunity picked you, meaning you go to a newspaper, especially in a pre-internet world, you get the job you can get and you work your way up. And if the first big beat that comes available is baseball, you might be a baseball beat writer. If it's football, whatever. But you don't get to pick in the old, in the old media. This was an opportunity that came my way after I'd been in the business for 6 years and got a job at the LA Daily News covering the Lakers. But I can't tell you that I sought it out. I can't tell you that it was like, I've got to go cover the NBA. I've got to cover basketball. I loved the sport. But I was much more of a casual NBA fan for most of my like childhood and into my 20s. This is just kind of the way things opened up for my career.
That's super interesting. And I obviously read up on that and how you took an unconventional path to get to where you are. So you go to UC Davis, go Ags, right? You got to make sure we say that.
Go Ags. Thank you.
You're writing for the school newspaper, but the school doesn't even have a journalism program. So how do you kind of navigate that to end up being able to find so much success after college?
So the UC system, the University of California system, like they don't believe in having majors, undergraduate majors that are overly specific, that are just for a trade. So like you can study economics, but not business. you could study
Wow.
English, lit, and other things that are in the humanities or in the area of writing, but not journalism. Too specific, too trade school oriented, I guess. It's kind of a UC arrogance or something. Although UCLA and UC Berkeley both have great graduate schools in journalism. I went there, and they had the newspaper, the student newspaper, was 5 days a week. And to me, that's the best training you can get. Journalism school is great. And I don't, I have, everybody I know who's gone to journalism school, they've benefited greatly from having done that, but it's not universal in this business. At one point, I think the stat was like 60-40, where 60% got journalism degrees and 40% were like me, came up a different route. This is one of those jobs where, and careers where experience is the most important teacher. There's a certain amount you can learn in the classroom. And I'm sure there's a lot that I could have gained from studying journalism as an undergrad, whether it comes to public records requests or studying interview techniques or a history of journalism, First Amendment law. There's all kinds of ways I could have had a more well-rounded, I guess, training period before doing it. But by going to UC Davis, where I studied English, but walked in on day one of my college life and walked into the newsroom of the California Aggie student newspaper and said, I want to be a sports writer. And they said, okay, go talk to the sports editor. I went and talked to the sports editor. He said, go talk to the cross country coach, write a preview of the season. That was literally my first story, was writing a preview of the UC Davis men's cross country team's season. And it just went from there. I mean, it's a 5-day-a-week paper. So I got deadline experience. I wrote a ton. Reps are really, really important in this business. Becoming a good reporter and writer just takes a lot of trial and error and practice and just repetition. So, and then I just kind of rose the ranks. I was a sports writer, then I became a sports editor. Then, as you mentioned, my unconventional path, I decided I wanted to do more than that. So I bounced over to the city desk and I covered City Hall, because small college town that UC Davis was in. And so we covered city stuff too, because all the city politics affected campus life. So I was on the city desk for a couple of years. I was editor in chief at the end, my final year. And then I did kind of something similar after I graduated, went to work for the local paper in Davis, California, the Davis Enterprise. And again, did sports for a little while, did City Hall, local government for a little while. And like I often say this, like my career doesn't make a damn bit of sense. Like there's no path to follow here. There's no like, hey kids, just do it this way. It's just the way I got here. And the opportunity in '97 to cover the Lakers came up in part because my former boss at the Davis Enterprise was now the sports editor at the LA Daily News. And they had an opening on the Laker beat because a guy by the name of Mark Stein had left the Daily News for the Dallas Morning News to go cover the Mavericks. And so Stein and I didn't even know each other. Like, we're really good friends now, but at that time I didn't know him at all. Like I was living in Ventura up the road from LA, and he had left 3 months beforehand. So we didn't even cross paths until being on the beat. But yeah, it's just kind of a funny little footnote to the whole thing that I essentially took over for Mark Stein on the Laker beat.
That's all super interesting, and how you just went through all these different ways to end up with the Lakers, which was a team that at the time was just primed. They were just a young team with Kobe just having been drafted, and then Shaq finally getting there, and then you're there right there perfectly in place for the three-peat era. So can you just kind of describe to our listeners kind of what it's like being a beat writer? Just obviously you kind of touched on the day-to-day of the deadlines and all that, but are you traveling with the team, or what's that whole situation like?
Yeah, so I think people always have it in their head. They got this old school kind of perception of how things were once upon a time, actually, which is, you cover a team, 82 games. Well, you must be, you fly with them, travel with them. It's with is the wrong preposition. We travel near them, I guess. So the Lakers would be on their own private charter, and they stayed in ritzy hotels. As a beat writer, you're flying commercial airlines and staying at not as ritzy hotels. We're all Marriott loyalists. The teams these days are, Four Seasons, Ritz-Carlton, boutique hotels that cost, $600 a night. Places that wouldn't let a scrubby sports writer like me through the door, probably. So you go everywhere they go. You do 82 games. I don't think I ever quite did 82. I might have done like 78 one year or something at the high. You got to take a day off here and there, but very few. But you go to every practice, you go to every shoot around. You're doing home and road. It was a 7-day-a-week job, and often it was 6-7 straight weeks without even a day off covering the Lakers. A little bit different when I was covering the Knicks, but a similar setup. You do everything. You go everywhere that they go. The job of being a beat writer is to be present. Like, it's really important to be present. That's how you learn a team. You build a rapport with players and coaches and scouts and executives. That's how you really learn the rhythms of a team, and the rhythms of the job too. I mean, there's no manual for doing this job. There's no right and wrong way to walk into a pregame locker room or a postgame locker room and ask questions to build a story or to react to the game that just happened. Everything is just on the fly. And so again, you kind of just have to learn the rhythms of players and their moods, and the rhythms of the league, and when guys are available, when they're not, how to navigate. Can I grab this guy coming off the court from his pregame routine as opposed to waiting till he's in the locker? There's just a lot of like the protocols that you just kind of pick up over time. So, but being present is really important. Like what it was like, there's that Woody Allen quote about like 95% of life or 99% of life is just showing up. Like, being a beat writer is a lot about showing up. It's about just being there and being present, observing, doing what Shaq used to tell us. This was usually in a different context, but Shaq used to love saying, "Write what you see, brother." Now, usually meant write what you see. Usually meant write what you see, which is that Kobe's not passing me the ball enough, or write what you see, which is that the referees weren't calling all the fouls against me. But I think of that quote a lot because I think it's a perfectly distilled, simplified, but very accurate version of what the job description is. Like, that's being a reporter. Write what you see. Go. There's a little more to it than that, but go out there, cover a game, cover a practice, cover whatever, cover a protest, cover anything. It's a lot of observation and then contextualizing that observation.
Like, I mean, it's to make it so simple with the write what you see, and your Shaq impression was actually pretty spot on. I think if our listeners just hear that,
I've had 23 years to work on it.
Yeah, that's great. So while you're covering the Lakers for those 7 years, from 97 to 2004, what were you seeing?
What was I seing?
You're seeing a lot. You're seeing a lot of championships.
Yeah. I mean, listen, John, I had no idea what I was getting into, to be honest. I mean, I did and I didn't. Shaq was already a larger than life figure, but he'd been in LA for 1 year and he had some injury issues, knee issues that first season. Kobe was 1 year in when I started covering them, but he's still, he's 19, I think, at the time that I meet him. And, he's 1 year in. He's had, kind of a rocky rookie season. They've just gotten Rick Fox, or he got there, I think, within the past year. Like, this team was really unformed. I really didn't know. I mean, there's not a chance in the world that anybody at that time, and certainly not me, but even more experienced people could have thought this team was going to become the dynasty that it did. There was a lot of unknown there, and nobody was sure that Kobe was going to become what he did. The outline was there, the possibilities were there, but nobody knew that.
Fresh off of shooting 4 air balls in a playoff game.
Against the Jazz. Yeah. And was really skinny still. And, and some of his more negative traits were the most prominent ones at that time, pretty brash, cocky, overconfident, and hadn't earned it yet. And, was really still just finding his way. And even my first year covering them, 97, 98, and into the lockout season of 99, he was still kind of trying to find his way. Things really didn't start to solidify until Phil Jackson got there for that 99-2000 year. And of course they win the first of 3 titles then. But I learned a lot covering that team about not just basketball, but just, team dynamics, obviously, because the Shaq and Kobe dynamic was so fraught. Guys like Rick Fox and Robert Horry, Derek Fisher, though he was younger than those guys, Brian Shaw, Ron Harper, Horace Grant, like all these guys who came through, the veterans were like so incredible in terms of their willingness to share their insights about the game, about how team dynamics work, explaining whatever was going on with them at the time. And it just kind of gave me, I think, a great basketball education. And Phil Jackson too, covering that team meant talking to him almost every day for 5 straight years, shoot arounds, pregame, postgame practices. And I think a lot of my own kind of I don't know how to, I guess, value system. Like the things that I like about basketball or certain teams, I think often come back to the things that Phil Jackson preached. Like I love this current Miami Heat team that's in the finals because of how selfless they are and the ball and player movement. And I think a lot of that is my bias coming from listening to Phil Jackson beat that drum for 5 years every day about, it's not that, Miami's not running the triangle offense, but to me, any offense that also values ball and player movement and a more egalitarian approach. And yeah, there's always a time when it's time for Michael to take over or Kobe to take over, or LeBron to take over, whoever. But the systems that are set up, and the Warriors were like this too the last several years under Steve Kerr. I think a lot of that I could trace back to those early years of covering the Lakers, where like that was what set a lot of my own impressions of what I think, great basketball should look like. And again, it's set during that time as opposed to earlier because I wasn't watching a ton of Warrior games back in the day as a kid growing up in the Bay Area because they sucked. Also, those games probably weren't on TV that much because the NBA wasn't on that much, and there was no such thing as League Pass or satellite TV back in my day because I'm old.
No, that stuff's all awesome in terms of how you're able to pick up all these nuances from all these all-time greats, and then so right when 2004 comes around, they end up losing in the finals. You then pick up and go to the New York Times, and you're covering the Knicks. Then, what was that decision kind of like for you going from the Lakers to come to New York?
After you've covered a team for a certain amount of time, and certainly at least for me, 7 years, here it was. I'm covering, the most glamorous team in the NBA, 2 of the biggest stars in the NBA, 3 if you want to throw Phil in there too. I live 2 blocks from the ocean in Hermosa Beach, but I had burned out. I was ready to move on. And part of that was where I was working. The Daily News was not the LA Times. The LA Times was the bigger, more esteemed paper, paid a lot better. The Daily News was a good, solid paper and a great place for me to work for those 7 years. But I really needed to get somewhere to, this is how newspapers work. Again, in media, you're always trying to find that next rung up. Like I started a small town paper, went to a mid-sized daily, a bit, and then a bigger paper. You want, for the sake of your own career growth and just continuing to improve, and sometimes just changing the scenery, you go for the next bigger paper. I had a couple of friends at the New York Times at that time. Mike Wise, I think, had just left the Times for the Washington Post. Liz Robbins was covering the Knicks, and I knew her well. Chris Broussard was on the NBA as the national guy, and I knew Chris. And so when openings were coming up, I heard about them, and I was looking, and I've got kind of you always hear about like East Coast bias, whatever. I've got like maybe a coastal bias. I grew up in California. I grew up in the Bay Area. I spent time in LA. Like I like bigger cities. I like the coasts. There weren't that many places I wanted to go, and I thought, well, New York was someplace I absolutely could see myself. My parents are actually from the Bronx. So I've got weird New York roots in a way. Like I was born in California, but like there was always a New York sensibility in my household. So it just kind of felt right. And it's the New York freaking Times. Like it's the greatest newspaper on earth. The opportunity to go to the New York Times, it didn't matter what I was covering, the Knicks, the Nets, whatever. Like if they'd hired me to cover field hockey or whatever, I probably would have taken it at that point. But yeah, clearly after 7 years on the Lakers, I wanted to take what I'd learned, that experience covering a big time team in a big market, and see what I could parlay that into. And the New York Times was by far the best place I could go, not only for the newspaper, but to live here in New York. We've been here 16 years now, love it here. It just felt right. It just felt like the right move. I don't mean to say that the Knicks are incidental to that, but they kind of were. It was like, this is where I wanted to be in terms of market and newspaper. And so, it was a shock to the system though. And on multiple levels, I'm going from, kind of sleepy beach community in LA to New York, a fairly collegial, beat on the Lakers where everybody got along well, to the Knicks beat where things could be a little more volatile, a little more intense. The Lakers, which was the ultimate mom and pop shop, like the Buss family, that's how they ran it. There was, I'll never forget this. I come to New York and I'm trying to learn this whole, just this enigma of the Knicks organization, just this it was just intimidating. So Cablevision at that time still owns the Garden. The Garden owns the Knicks. So now there's a PR guy for the Knicks, and there's a PR guy above him who works for the Garden, and a PR guy above that who works for Cablevision. And I just like trying to figure out who pulls the strings where. It was just it was just a labyrinth of. And so I go back to the Knicks are playing the Lakers back in LA. It's my first time back there. And Mitch Kupchak, the GM of the Lakers, we're sitting in the press room, in the dining room, pregame meal. We're shooting the shit. And he's asking how New York is. And I mentioned to Mitch at one point, I said, man, I'm just trying to figure out the organization. It's really complex. Whatever, you guys are this total mom and pop shop. It's just, Jerry Buss, and then you, and then, and then the coach. And then I said, your flow chart is a lot smaller and easier to kind of read or whatever. And Mitch says something, I'm going to botch my Mitch Kupchak Long Island impression, but he's something like, Howard, I've been working here for 25 years. I've never seen a flow chart. They didn't have a flow chart. They didn't need one. They were like, it was the Lakers. They were like, seriously, the chain of command was very simple. And so there was just a lot of things to adjust to. And also, again, the Lakers, just a fairly easygoing environment, even in the intense times, and times did get very tense. The Knicks, I had no idea just how much more corporate it would be, how much more controlled the environment would be. They threw up a lot more obstacles. So it was tougher. It was a challenge. And, to say nothing, of course, of, the basketball, which was not quite of the same quality.
Definitely two different extremes. You go from a three-peat to the definition of mediocrity. So, I mean, it was pretty cool. Right, like towards the end of 2013, that's the Knicks' best season. They won 54 games. It must have been fun. Yeah. So that was definitely one of the most fun teams the Guardians had in 20 years.
Yeah. So I spent the 9 years at the Times. It was almost entirely on the Knicks, but that season, the one you're talking about, 12-13, when they win 54 games, that was the year that the Brooklyn Nets launched in Brooklyn. Yeah. So my editors at the Times had said, look, this is a big deal that there's professional sports, a professional team in Brooklyn again for the first time in 50 years. Do you want to switch over and cover that? Because we see this as a newspaper, they saw this as a major event, and it was not just a basketball thing. It was cultural. It was all these things. Do you want to go cover the Nets for a while? Yep. I'm like, sure. It'd be nice to take a break. I'd been on the Knicks for 8 years at that point, which was even longer than I'd covered the Lakers. And as I told you, I got burned out even on covering a good team, much less a team that with all the dysfunction and bad basketball the Knicks had. So I took that break, but about 4 months in, and it was apparent that the Knicks were having this kind of magical run, and they pulled me back. They said, we need you back on the Knicks.
That's funny.
So I covered, I think my first game back on the Knicks was the night that Steph Curry had that incredible 3-point shooting night.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I finish out whatever the last couple months plus the playoffs on the Knicks that year. And yeah, that was it was much more exciting, much more charged, and just the atmosphere was obviously much more positive then. But I have to say, my favorite moments of covering the Knicks was not the 54 win season. Maybe part of it's because I wasn't on it the whole time, but I always feel like the most enjoyable periods of time on the Knicks beat during my time were the first couple months of the Amare era, after, whatever it was. I'd gotten there in 2004. So it had been 6 years of a lot of insanity, Larry Brown, Marbury, Isaiah, all that stuff. And Amare comes in, puts the Knicks cap on, and says, the Knicks are back, baby. And they sign Raymond Felton, and, Gallinari is starting to find his way in the league, and Wilson Chandler's emerging. And that team was not just successful, but a lot of fun to watch those first couple months. And then they started to kind of get stuck in the mud a little bit. Then they make the Carmelo trade, and so all the young guys who were bringing some of the energy to that team, now they're gone. Carmelo's in. Carmelo and Amare have to figure their way out. They play 500 ball the rest of the way. So this is not to cast aspersions on Carmelo or to relitigate that trade, but there was something fun and organic about that first couple months of that season with that group that had started to grow together. And then the other time, of course, and top of the list for me was Linsanity.
Oh my God. Yeah.
For all the obvious reasons. You can't see it coming. It was absolutely magical, mind-blowing, just a thrill ride. The Garden was as charged as I'd ever seen it in my time here. And And plus it was a road show too, wherever the Knicks went, Toronto, the crowd was totally into it for Jeremy Lin, despite being a loyal Raptor crowd. Washington, DC, we went down there. That was another crowd that was really pro Jeremy Lin. So like Linsanity and the first couple months of the Amare Knicks were, I think, the best times on that beat for me.
That's great. And it's so cool that you're able to have, I mean, towards the end of that, at least, so many good experiences one after the other. But you had mentioned like the whole thing about, right, when you come back, you see Steph Curry at 54. Obviously, there were probably plenty of times when opposing teams had a lot more success against in the Garden than the Knicks did. When Kobe had 61 in 2009, did he say anything to you afterwards?
I think that was the night. I'm trying to remember because he had a couple of big ones there. And I might be conflating this. There was the one time he came through and had a big game, and he went straight to chatting with Spike after the game because they were collaborating on I think it was the Kobe Doing Work documentary, and that might have been that night. Plus, it was just, especially before they redid the Garden, those hallways were really narrow and jammed up. So I didn't always get a chance to chit chat with him. Like I did whenever possible when he came through, whether it was, if they had an off day here and had a practice, maybe we chit chat there a little bit. But I don't remember if we had a conversation specifically apart from the crowd that day.
That's great. So then obviously in 2013, you end up going over to Bleacher Report, which is they were in their infancy at that point. And they've grown so much since then. What was that kind of like from going from the greatest newspaper of all time to something that was just starting and now it's become larger than life?
Yeah. So Bleacher Report was founded in 2007 and I go there in 2013. So the organization at that point is 6 years old. So yeah, really, really in its infancy. And coming from newspapers where, like the New York Times was 100 and something years old when I left there. The Ventura County Star, the LA Daily News, the Davis Enterprise, all the papers I'd worked for had been around for, decades, if not longer. And so, it was one of those things where there was some risk. There was a lot of excitement and then just intrigue. This was an opportunity to kind of shift things. I was, pretty deep into my career, maybe midpoint of my career. And you can spend your entire career as a newspaper reporter, being perfectly fulfilled, going out, reporting, writing, doing the usual routine that I'd been doing at that time for 20 years, and be perfectly happy doing it. And I was, and I thought I'd spend the rest of my life at the New York Times. I never thought I would move on. I hadn't even sent out a single resume in 9 years there and had no plans to leave. I got a cold call from Bleacher Report. It was not literally a call. It was an email, but cold email doesn't sound as good as cold call. Out of the blue from a guy named Dylan McNamara, who I didn't even know who he was, but he was, as it turns out, the talent recruiter for Bleacher Report. And he says, I'm coming through New York. Would love to have a cup of coffee if you've got a minute. And I thought he was going to pitch me on writing a story about Bleacher Report or something. And I'd heard of it, but I don't think I'd ever even been on their website. And I don't think the app existed at that time. I don't think did apps even exist in 2013? I guess they did. So I go and have coffee with him, and he's pitching me on working there, and I'm got the wheels turning. And, this is what they laid out. You come here, you'll cover the NBA, you'll write, you won't have to write quite as often because newspapers, you just, especially at that time, I was cranking out 250 stories a year for the Times. You'll write, wow. You'll be national NBA. And I was certainly looking forward to something like that. We're not being strapped to one team, national beat. And we're going to go really heavy on video. We're going to do just a ton of video. Plus, we've got all these other possibilities. So they were, and they had just been bought by Turner. So the partnership or the ability to maybe partner with NBA TV and do some things. So there was a whole possibility here of new things to do, new talents to try to cultivate, or skills to cultivate that I didn't have. I was a reporter and writer strictly, and I get to Bleacher Report, and now I'm, I can't remember how many hours of video we did, a ridiculous amount. Rick Bucher and I were doing like these 3-minute debates on everything under the sun for hours at a time. And so I got all these reps there. And initially there was BR radio on Sirius XM. So I had my own show there. That went away eventually, but I still do some work for NBA radio. So just open up all these avenues. And I did do, a semi-regular gig with NBA TV. Sometimes that was monthly, sometimes weekly. And for me, it was just the opportunity to mid-career shake it up, broaden my horizons a little bit, and take a risk. I figured at that time, there aren't going to be that many more opportunities maybe to do something, to take a leap like this, a leap of faith, and see where it takes me. And I was, also intrigued by the idea that like this place is in its infancy. Like the New York Times was as established as can be. And when you work at the New York Times, it's an honor just to be there and be part of that legacy. There had been a bazillion writers and even just NBA writers there before me, and there would be after me. You were a spoke in a wheel, and that's fine. Like I loved filling that role, and the 9 years I had there and all those bylines, like I treasure that. But the chance to go to a place that was still kind of new and help form what it would become, maybe contribute to that trajectory and its growth, held a different kind of intrigue. And here we are 7 years later. I'm now weeks away from departing BR, and I feel like I did. I left. I do feel like I left an impression there. I do feel very good about it's a huge operation, and journalism and my part of it are a tiny piece of it. So I would not for a second take any credit for what Bleacher Report has grown into in the last 7 years, but I played my part. And I do feel good about what I and other reporters who work there, other journalists who work there, and other people that I collaborated with there, people in the video team, and others. Like it's been amazing to see what it has become in just in the time that I've been there.
That's so amazing to see how they're able to grow. I mean, through all these different avenues, and you're right that they have, whether it's Game of Zones or all these new different fun, unique ways to grow the brand. And it's worked over the last just 7 years to where they're probably, it's them, ESPN, like all those are the big sports ones, and they're right there with them. So that's awesome. Where do you see the future taking you now that you're going to be departing Bleacher Report soon?
I would love to break news on your podcast, John, but it's I don't have news to break yet. I'm still under contract. Still got a little ways to go here with Bleacher Report, and having some really nice conversations with some places, and hope to sort out all of that in the next 3-4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. But I've got a little time, so we'll hopefully have something more to share soon. And certainly will be settled by the time next season starts, but probably long before that. But it'll be something that's similar in terms of, I think, the overall repertoire. Like I will still be writing, I'll still be podcasting, probably doing a little bit of radio on the side, and some TV or whatever else comes available. But it'll be another kind of hybrid job, I think.
Of course, and that's awesome. I mean, yeah, it would be if you had news to break on Big Fellas Basketball. That'd be pretty funny. But I don't know. Best of luck, obviously, going forward, and I'm sure the next few months are gonna be great. Is the full 48? Is the podcast aligned with Bleacher Report, or is that your own standalone thing?
No, that is under their banner. It is their branding, and it is part of the broader Turner platform. So I'll be leaving the full 48 title, everything else behind. So wherever I land, we'll be having to come up with a new name. So if you got any great suggestions, if your listeners have any great suggestions, I'm all ears. I've been joking that I'll just call it the full 49, but that doesn't quite make as much sense.
You get the full 48 plus overtime, something. I don't know. We'll definitely, I have so many ideas. I just started this show about 2-3 months ago. I have so many ideas brainstorming for this show. So I definitely have a few. We could talk off air, but that's great though. I mean, what kind of got you into starting the podcast? Was it kind of an idea that Bleacher Report had for you, or did you kind of come up with it?
By the time we started the podcast was only 3 years old. We, launched it in April 2017. And at that time, I think Adam Lefkoe and Chris Sims had their podcasts, the Lefkoe and Sims podcast on the NFL. I think that was the only podcast Bleacher Report had. So Bleacher Report had kind of been slow to wade into podcasting. It was not something that was a real big focus. And I think, there was always talk about it, and it would come up every so often. Somebody internally would say, "Hey, well, what do you think about doing a podcast?" And I'd say, whenever we're ready to do one, I'm in. Because by that time I'd been doing radio off and on for a couple of years with Sirius XM, and I enjoyed that. And I thought, now that I've kind of gotten, a sense of how to do that, how to be a broadcaster, I think I can translate that. I think if I can do a couple hours of live radio, I can do an hour podcast. So it was just a matter of timing and just a matter of everybody being, being committed to it. And at a certain point, everybody decided this is the time to do it. And so we launched in April 2017. It was me with Jordan Brenner as co-host initially. The format at that time was a little different. We would do some opening banter and I think talking about some of the issues going on in the NBA. Then we would do the interview for maybe 20, 30 minutes. Then we would have like a post-game wrap up essentially of the interview, where we would tape a third segment where we would break down, what Terry Stotts was just talking to us about, or Kevin McHale, I think was one of our early episodes. And then Jordan left BR a few months after that. And then it's just been, me ever since. And, but it's just evolved as it's gone. And, it's been a lot of fun to do. It's been, I think it's been one of the greatest benefits of having made the move to BR, and not one that I could have seen in 2013. Right. Because now it's one of my favorite things to do. When you're a reporter for years, it's this similar routine. You go out every day, you do some reporting, you interview people, you go back, you have to painfully then transcribe off of tape all those quotes, write the story. Writing can be torture too. And the podcast is like all of the fun stuff, all the conversation without any of the pain. I don't have to transcribe. I don't have to write a story. I just bring on guests that I'm really interested in talking to. We have a great conversation, hit start, hit stop. And then I have a producer, Stacey Parra, very talented Parra out in LA. And she makes sure it sounds good and polishes it all up and uploads it everywhere and drops the ads in. And there we go. So, but yeah, the podcast has been a blast.
That's awesome. And I never really realized I'd love it as much as I did too. And the quarantine just sparked it. I've run with it, and I'm having on awesome people like yourself. So I'm doing something right. That's cool. So one last thing I wanted to touch on was the video you just made. I will not stick to sports. Super powerful. And it was everywhere. And it was a really strong stand that you took against systematic racism. Can you kind of just unpack that a little bit for us in terms of what made you make the video, and also then the impact you've seen it have on everyone?
Yeah, no, thanks. So TNT launched a show called The Arena to coincide with the restart of the season in the bubble. And the idea, I think, that Turner had was they wanted a show, separate from inside the NBA or separate from anything that was already going on NBA TV. They wanted a show that it kind of took on this moment. So basketball is restarting, but in this very unusual format, in within the bubble and everything that goes with that. But at the same time, we are as a society, and of course the NBA as a league, dealing with social unrest, with systemic racism and police brutality, all of the protests that had been spawned by the George Floyd killing in late May. All of that is the backdrop for the new NBA season. And of course, on top of that, we still have the pandemic going on too. And so I think the idea was, let's do a show that kind of acknowledges that all these things are simultaneous, and that the players in the league are dealing with this the same way that society at large is. And so they launched The Arena. They wanted to have every episode a kind of a launching off point of a video essay, where a contributor, sometimes within the Turner family, or sometimes without, like Jamel Hill did, I think, one of the first ones, and obviously just does not work for TNT, but she contributed an essay early on, a video essay. And so they then came to BR, and they said to those of us on the writing staff, if you want to contribute to this, this is something that's open to you. We want to make this a partnership between Bleacher Report and TNT on this show. And so the wheels started turning, and I thought, well, where could I take a video essay? And we like my buddy, my buddy Jonathan Abrams did one about Kobe, how it had been 10 years since Kobe's last championship run, and reflecting on that. So it could be basketball, it could be off-court stuff. But I kept thinking about the fact that the longer we went into this restart, that people had, I think, kind of started to get numb to all the social justice messaging, the Black Lives Matter on the court, the jersey messages. And I kept thinking about, as I said in the video, a few of them in particular, a few of the messages on the jerseys in particular, the ones that said, listen to us, hear us, respect us, because this is a league that's 80% Black. Black players don't need to tell other Black people listen or hear on these issues. They know. The audience for listen to us, hear us is clearly, as I said in the video, it's me. it's white people. And so I thought there's a message here that I think can be amplified, and I thought that this was an opportunity to do that. When they said all options are open, what's on your mind? What would you like to talk about for 2 to 3 minutes in a video essay? That was the one that I just kept coming back to that really resonated. And especially because I do think that the problems that we're seeing in our society, obviously over hundreds of years, were systems built by a white majority. So if white people constructed the systems that are creating these problems, the systemic racism, the police brutality that's been allowed to continue, the social inequities, the inequities in the justice system. So white people have the obligation to take it on, but they can't do that if they won't acknowledge that it exists. So when Black people and Black players are telling you, this is what I experience on a daily basis, and if it's not me, then it's my friends or my neighbors or my family, we need to listen. And what's frustrating sometimes is especially because I spend too much time on Twitter, is seeing how ignorant people can be, or how closed-minded they can be, or how they just don't want to, sit down for 2 seconds and consider that maybe they haven't seen everything there is to see in our society, that maybe they can't acknowledge this because they haven't experienced it. And that's fine, but just listen to the people who are telling you their personal stories of how their lives have been impacted by racism. Like we have to listen. If we don't listen, then we can't be part of the solution. And maybe there's certainly some people who don't want to hear it at all because they either don't believe it at all and refuse to believe it, or they're fine with it. And you can't reach those people. But there are a lot of people, I think, who can be reached if they would just sit down for a second and think about why they don't understand these issues, because they haven't experienced it. So I'd seen Steve Kerr and Greg Popovich and Stan Van Gundy, Kyle Korver in his Players Tribune piece a couple years ago. I'd seen other people, within the NBA, white coaches, white players, who would stand up and say, listen, I have to be part of the solution. And I thought, how powerful is that? You're used to hearing these pleas to deal with racism come from those who are most affected, but it needs to be acknowledged and embraced by the rest of us who haven't necessarily been directly impacted. It's our problem too. And so, Pop had an incredible video that he put out over social channels in late May, early June, whenever it was, in the wake of the George Floyd killing. And so, I took inspiration from Pop and Steve Kerr and Kyle Korver, others, and thought this is an opportunity to be part of this conversation as well. These messages, like I said, I think people are starting to grow a little numb to it. Maybe it's faded a little bit. And I think it sounds different when maybe it's a white person talking to the white audience as opposed to Black players just trying to get heard. And so we all have to be part of that conversation. We all have to be part of the solution. And I wanted to, in the most thoughtful and hopefully non-preachy way possible, lend my voice to that. So I wrote a script. I sent it to the folks with Turner in Atlanta. They liked it. We made a couple of minor tweaks, but for the most part, that was pretty much what I wrote, start to finish. And we went and shot the whole thing. I'd never done anything like that on camera before. Like I did, the Kobe video essay after he died back in January, but that was just my voiceover. So this was a little bit different, different experience to, actually kind of try to, deliver this in this amazing setting that they had created in this basement space in Bushwick. It was really a fulfilling experience. I'm really glad I got a chance to do it. And thanks again to Turner for embracing the idea and giving me the platform. And the response has been amazing. It was a ton of people texting or hitting me on Twitter over the next several days. 98% of it positive. I mean, I really thought it was going to be, maybe it was more like 90%. But I really expected a lot more backlash and and negativity and hatred, because a lot of people don't want to hear that message. I was really heartened by how positive the majority of the responses were.
That's fantastic that the response was so positive, because that was something I was curious about to see as to, was it more 50-50, or was it, I mean, 90 to 10 is great that you were able to touch that many people with such a beautiful message. So, I mean, that was great. And you're right. There's so many other coaches, players that have done that in the past. And it does have a profound effect when they go out and they speak on that. So you doing it was just adds another layer to it. It was great. So thank you for that.
Thank you. No, thank you. Yeah, it was, like I say, it was an honor to be able to do it. And I'm glad it resonated. That was the most important thing, is that you hope it resonates. You hope it resonates with as many people as possible. You hope that people take it in the right way. And it was just very gratifying.
Of course. So just to wrap up, I had one last question for you, in terms of, you obviously taken a really unconventional journey to get to this point. You've had a lot of success in journalism. What's some advice you would have to someone that maybe either has a goal in mind or doesn't have a goal in mind, and maybe it's the same goal as yours, and as to how they can chase their dreams?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's always a hard one to answer, because the media business has changed so dramatically in the years that I've been doing this, and continues to evolve constantly. And it's a very competitive field. A lot of people, everybody who loves sports would love to find a way to work close to sports in one way or another. And if you love writing, or you love the idea of broadcasting, and doing anything in media around sports, there's all kinds of avenues that didn't exist when I first started. Newspapers were pretty much, obviously there was radio and TV too, but it was pretty much those three categories. The internet was not a thing. And so there are a number of ways in now. You can start your own podcast, as you have. People can start their own blogs, as they have. I've seen people just start up, they're basically kickstart their career on Twitter, just by having a unique voice. I can't give anybody an instruction manual, like, here's how to carve out a job covering the NBA as a reporter, or as a writer, as a podcast, or whatever. What I can say is, if you're passionate about not just the sport, but about media too. Like, I don't think it's enough just we'll stick to basketball as the framework here. It's not enough just to love basketball or love talking about basketball. You have to love you have to have a certain curiosity. You have to love being analytical. You have to love putting words together, whether it's on a microphone, as we're doing now, or on the written page. The communication part of this business is the majority of it, right? Like, if basketball ceased to exist tomorrow, I could walk away and go cover City Hall again, or I could cover a different sport, or I could cover whatever, environmental justice, something, name any topic under the sun. Because I came up as a reporter and writer first, like the skills that I worked on, it wasn't about covering basketball. That happens to be where I landed, and I love it. And I'm very grateful for, the last 23 years that I've been covering this league. But the things that got me here, and I think the things that drive, most, not all, but most people who have some longevity in this profession, and even just covering the NBA, is that it's not necessarily just about the basketball or just about sports. It's about their curiosity and their desire to tell a great story, to dig into a player, a personality, an issue, a trend, whatever, and explore it, and let your curiosity take you where it takes you, and then assembling all that information and packaging it together in, a 3,000 word story, or maybe an 800 word story, or a 3-minute video, or whatever. It's all these other things. And so, if you have a passion for the game, by all means, find a way to channel that. But there are a lot of different ways to work in and around basketball that aren't about media. If you want to be in media, you have to love the media part of it too. It's got to be about, as I say, the exploration, the reporting and the writing, and like, as I say, the communication side of it. So I think it's about that. I think it's, have a healthy curiosity, nurture that curiosity. Find if you want to be a writer, find the writers that resonate with you most and read all their stuff, and then go back and read their old stuff. And then if they have a book of their best stuff, go read that. Like I've got a couple of Frank DeFord books on my shelf. Frank DeFord was like the premier Sports Illustrated writer back when I was first getting into reading a lot of sports writing. So find the writers whose stuff you like, read it a lot, and then step back and say, well, why do I like it? Like, what do they do that's so good that I think is so appealing that brings me back to the writing over and over? And if it's podcasting, okay, well then who are your favorite podcasters? What do they do well? What can you learn from what you hear from them on their podcast? And then, obviously there's all the educational routes. You can go to journalism school, you can go to broadcasting school. I mean, there are ways to do this in a more formal manner, but I've always said, and as everybody else, taught me over the years, to be a great writer or even a good writer, you just have to write a lot and you have to read a lot. And that's how you find your way. And it's the reps, it's practice. It's getting a lot of bad stories out of your system so that you can finally write the good ones. It's trial and error. It's writing a lot of things that years later you look back, and this is absolutely true for me. You look back and you go, holy crap, what the hell was I thinking? That is the lamest joke. That is a terrible wordplay. That was a terrible angle. You always go back and look and see what you could have done better. And that's a big part of I think advancing this career too, is being a really harsh self-critic.
That's great. And what I can take from that is just, first off, start. If you haven't started, you have to start. That was a lot of the early part. And then just later on, just be tough on yourself. Just keep on working at it. And obviously, like your New Testament, good things will come if you don't have to always have that end goal in mind. But if you just lay the groundwork for it, you'll be good. So Howard, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I mean, you gave us so much valuable information about just obviously your experiences and then where that's taken you. So thank you so much.
No, my pleasure, John. Thanks for having me. Appreciate all the great, thoughtful questions, and best of luck to you.
Thanks for listening to the Big Fellas Podcast. Check us out on all major social media platforms at Big Fellas Pod to join the chop up. You can also listen to us on every podcast platform on the planet. Stay tuned for the next episode, Big Fellas.